New Landing's Job Chat is brought to you in New Landing's Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
We all like to hear stories. They capture our imagination. But how can stories help you in your job search? You'll find out today from our guest on Job Chat. Your hosts today are Hector Silva and Sarah Kane. Our guest today is Andrew Nemiccolo.
Nemiccolo.
My apologies. Sarah, a little about our guest.
Andrew is founder of 7-Story Learning, which helps individuals and organizations communicate through story in order to learn, lead, and sell more effectively. Through group workshops, organization-wide initiatives, and individual coaching, Andrew teaches the simple chapter method of finding, refining, and delivering great stories. Andrew is a former high school Japanese language teacher, successful salesperson, and sales coach, with a BA in East Asian Studies from Colby College in Waterville, Maine. He has an MBA in Marketing and Finance from the Kellogg School at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, which he attended on a 2-year Austin Scholarship. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Welcome, Andrew. We hear stories all the time. Why are they important?
Well, stories are important because really nothing else works. When you think about crucial conversations that you need to have, trying to learn, lead, sell, motivate, stories are really the things that work the best. And I came to that realization kind of gradually. I really thought when I became a salesperson that I should be factual and purely use evidence and data and statistics. And there's certainly, we want to be factual and truthful, but purely leading with facts, it doesn't work. It doesn't connect with us. And I had an experience that sort of changed that my mindset for me. I went out to my customers as a rookie salesperson. I tried to sell with data. I'd show them studies and evidence, and I talk purely in numbers. And they'd say, "Oh, that's interesting, but no, thank you." And I thought, this is kind of weird. I mean, people are supposed to make decisions rationally, right? We're all rational beings, and we all make, with the best decisions possible. They probably just need to hear more data. And so then I'd go out and I'd share more information and try it again. And they'd say, "No, thank you." And I realized I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I still was sort of perplexed. And with hindsight, it's kind of comical now, but I really didn't get it. And it was only when some of my partners sat me down and said, stop annoying the customers. You need to really take a step back. And it was really quite a moment for me. And I sort of gave myself permission to start using stories to talk about the products, to talk about sort of everything in a story fashion, and also to get my customers talking to me. Because that's really the point of stories. It's not about storytelling. It's about you're getting a conversation going where they're really responding with their stories, so you can identify customer needs. And really, once I figured that out, it was off to the races. And I've sort of never looked back since. And I can't imagine trying to sell or do anything else without stories.
Andrew, I think I've heard you say that you don't like the word storytelling. Why is that?
Yeah, well, again, it's not, I wouldn't say it's verboten, but I think the idea of purely storytelling I think it perpetuates a few myths. First of all, there's a wonderful culture, the storytelling culture in America, festivals and things that venerate that. But it also can lead to this idea of sort of what I call mountaintop storytelling. So the idea of imagine, Steve Jobs or John F. Kennedy standing in front of a large crowd addressing everyone. It's sort of a one-way broadcast. And they're great orators. There's a lot we can learn from them. But I think for your average person who's thinking, well, I just need to go to a networking event. I just need to sell a product. I just need to get somebody to invest in me. That's a really high hurdle. And moreover, it's really one-way focused, because most of us are having, sort of like us here, small group settings. Most of our most important conversations happen in maybe one or two people at the table. And so, those coffee, what I call, watering hole, coffee shop conversations or campfire conversations tend to be what most of us are going to have if you think about the conversations you're going to have in a day. And so I think story listening is an equally important thing. It's all about, getting someone else to tell you a story. And often the best way to do that is telling a vulnerable story about yourself.
Are there any studies out there that have shown that stories are easier to understand than just the data and statistics?
That's the ironic part. So there's lots of data that tells us that stories are effective. So pause for a moment there, right? The data is telling us not to use data. So irony aside, yeah, there's tons of data on that. One thing that I talk about often when I do workshops, because that's one of the most astounding numbers. A psychologist at Yale named Jerome Bruner did a study that showed that stories were 22 times more likely to be memorable than facts alone. So 22 times. That's 2,200%. And in fact, there's lots more data. A gentleman named Kendall Haven did a sort of a meta-analysis of stories, and without boring you, there's hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that in every culture, at any age, whether it's business, school, leadership, community, stories simply work better. It's how we're wired. And to illustrate that, we're in a political. There's a campaign coming up, I think, this year, presidential, and without getting into politics, I would just ask you to think about this. Think of one of your most strongly held beliefs, just a really visceral, emotional, strongly held belief. So actually think about that for a second. And let me ask you a question. Is there any data or study that I could show you that would change your mind?
It'd have to be pretty strong evidence.
Right.
I'd agree.
Yeah, and so I think that's the challenge. When we show data, purely show data, we actually put up people's defenses. And so there's even data that shows that, and if you're married, you may know this, trying to convince someone of, with data and persuade them, it doesn't work. In fact, they often move farther along the spectrum, away from the middle, because those natural defense mechanisms go up. Whereas when people are in story mode, and it actually is a different mode, different areas of the brain are working. When people are in story mode, they're much more receptive. And so that's to go back to the example where I was sort of using stories to sell. The funny part was, by using data, purely data, I was actually making my customers and partners and folks I spoke with more skeptical. I was saying, get into skeptical mode, get into a very hypercritical mode, as opposed to using a story with the same data, but woven in. Stories just people, open up. There's actually a word for it. It's called narrative transport. And it literally means that when you think of a story, you're transported to the other place, the same way that you feel when you get lost in a book or movie. And so a lot of scientists are studying this. So again, to bring this back to the, sort of practical reasons, I think this is stuff that nobody can afford to miss out on. Stories are too important to leave to chance.
So let's take it over into the realm of job searching.
Sure.
How do stories then become important in job searching? We're all out there basically selling ourselves. Mm-hmm. Do you find saying that stories then will help you sell yourself to a potential employer that much easier? Absolutely.
So, the approach that I'll tell you about is actually an approach that I've done for every job I've gotten, and it takes a lot of work. But having a prepared sort of overview of stories is one of the best self-branding exercises that someone can do. And it takes a little bit of time. You can't just, spend 20 minutes and say, great, I've now done my thorough self-investigation and I'm ready to roll, and I know who I am. Now certainly there's some patterns that come up, but I think it gives people the confidence, the self-awareness of who they are and where they're headed, and that shows up really clearly in job situations, right? But I think it gives you a sense of who you're not, and it allows you then to transform those vague brand ideas. Well, I think I'm hardworking, and well, what does that mean? How do you really illustrate that in the mind of a potential employer, in the mind of someone you're trying to have invest in your company as an entrepreneur? Giving them examples gives them proof. It gives them everything they need. It sort of lowers their natural questions they have anyway. Can you do this? Well, if you give them lots of examples, you're probably going to answer that question for them.
New Landing's Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. A job loss is an unsettling experience that almost always challenges finances and lifestyle. Important decisions need to be made immediately that work toward protecting financial security, which include making significant adjustments to day-to-day spending habits. The obvious catch is how to make ends meet on less income. If you should find yourself and your family in this situation, you should begin by itemizing all of your current expenses, no matter how small, and assigning them as either fixed or discretionary. Examples of fixed expenses are mortgage payments or health insurance premiums. Discretionary expenses would include entertainment costs or that weekly dinner out at your favorite restaurant. The key is to eliminate as many of your discretionary expenses as possible and reduce your fixed expenses if able. More importantly, don't postpone these decisions even if you receive a generous severance package. You must tackle them right away. Your ability to maintain a wide array of financial options may depend on a proactive rather than a reactive approach to budgeting so that you can protect your other financial goals like retirement and the assets earmarked for them. Again, I'm Willie Measley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
Storytelling can seem kind of like a big task for a lot of people, but you said that we're naturally wired to be drawn to stories. Is it something that we're all born with? We can tell stories? Is it something that we can learn if we're not born with it? What would you say?
I think that's a good question. I think to some degree we're all born with the ability to do it, and I think we all know people who are just naturally good at it. So it's probably a combination of sort of nature and nurture, but absolutely, I believe that people can, and I'm a good example of someone who can actually look at stories, focus on it, and improve. And a lot of the clients I've worked with have said that, wow, just after a little bit of time, their storytelling and story listening skills have improved. So I think it's a little bit of each. I think the biggest hurdle for a lot of folks is just in getting comfortable with it. In my situation, it was more giving myself permission to tell stories. Some people may be in companies or cultures, or maybe it may have family backgrounds where they don't feel comfortable telling stories. And so there's, whether they're perceived as childish, not serious, maybe the idea of stories as being inauthentic.
Fairy tales.
Yeah, and exactly. So we don't want to go down that path, but all the things that attract us to fairy tales or their not so nice cousin, the urban legend. There are all elements in those that we can learn from about how people's minds work. And so just having an awareness of it, I think, is a big first step, and it can be learned.
Going to job searching and interviews, when you apply for a position, you put in your resume, and your resume basically says, these are the things I've done.
Right.
It doesn't tell you how you did them. Is that where the stories come in? The how?
I think so. I think at some level, a resume could tell the basics of a story, or it should prompt a question. Wow, this is really interesting. I want to learn more. How did you do this? Because it's the how that really, as you said, allows you the chance to, sort of go through that story arc with someone. Here's why this is so important. Here's why I got excited about it. And I was nervous, but I tried it. Being able to walk someone through, the ups and downs of a story allows you to show that you're a problem solver, that you're addressing challenges. It's not easy. I think there's a temptation to come across as perfect and polished and that you know everything. We all hate that question. That I guess the answer of, what's your greatest weakness? Oh, I work too hard, right? Well, that's not authentic. But someone who's really, able to, describe how they did something, why they did it, what their thought process was, they're almost taking us along with them on that journey, and we get to see how their mind works. I've heard the phrase said that it's almost like a mental simulator, flight simulator. So it's allowing someone else just to go along and see how you did it and see how you operate, which is at least gives them some more data about how you might perform on the job.
It gives them the confidence that if you've done this before, you can do it for them also.
Right.
It also gives them an indication of your communication skills.
I was thinking the same thing. It's funny that you said that. Yeah, exactly. If nothing else, we all need to be good communicators. And you look at job descriptions, right? Every job has high communication skills as an example. So especially for salespeople, but really for anyone who has to communicate persuasively. the fact that you're telling stories probably is a good sign.
And when you're telling a story, I'm guessing you need to know for yourself what the goal, that outcome you want to be, so you can tell the story appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. One thing, and this is sort of a quick and dirty way to think about it, is to sort of, think about, for a position, what are the key attributes? What are the skills, the behaviors they're looking for? And to really dig down and then build stories out of those things that address those issues. And I always encourage people to go deeper. What I mean by that is, there may be a business or technical skill that is sort of, to be able to use a certain computer language, or to understand, financial statements in a certain way. That's a sort of a technical skill. But underlying that, what are some of the transferable skills, that could be used more broadly? And what does it really say about the really deep issues like flexibility, creativity, teamwork? That's really an opportunity to speak at multiple levels.
Now, one of the things about stories, especially when we're telling stories about ourselves, people are kind of reluctant to boast.
Yeah.
Would you say that the story allows you to do that in an easier fashion?
I think it can. It's a great question, Hector. I think for a couple of reasons. A lot of us, we want to be modest. We don't want to, stand out. So how do stories help us do that? One way is, again, by looking at stories are really just opportunities to show how you solved a conflict. How did you deal with the problem? And so the fact that there is a problem is something that not everybody wants to go to. But if you can deal with it in an authentic way, in a genuine way, that kind of gives you the chance to maybe show some weaknesses, and then how you overcame them. And so that it shows it's a really the normal way you talk with your friends, frankly, right? So it allows you to show how you're overcoming those challenges. I think the other thing is that you talk about boasting. You can also talk about allies and mentors. So when we talk about stories, there's conflicts and there's heroes. And certainly for a job seeker, you probably need to be the hero during your stories for an important interview. You need to talk about things that you've done. This is your chance. You don't want to blow it. But a way to do that and still be modest is to remember, hey, who are the people you went to? Did you go to a mentor? Did you find an ally, a partner? Weave them into the story too, because none of us usually do these things on our own. And that shows teamwork, it shows flexibility, it acknowledges the contributions of others. So there's a way, I think, to be strong and humble at the same time. And again, back to the studies, there's a lot of data that shows that vulnerability stories, or how I overcame my weakness stories, underdog stories, are actually some of the most powerful ones. It's why the Rocky franchise exists in the movie business. We all love underdog stories.
When you said before that you started to use this in your sales pitches, did you find people were all good listeners, or were some that you had to draw out more than others?
That's a good question. I think my most important goal was to make myself a good listener. And I realized that I hadn't been the best listener. When you're telling facts, you typically tend to be telling, and you tend to be sort of sharing them one way. And stories allowed for a less linear and a more circular approach. So I would say that it actually became a great story listening exercise for me, because I found that people found it much more engaging, and I became a better listener. So the onus wasn't really on them at all to be a good listener to me. In fact, if they would interrupt me, all the better, because that means now we're actually having a conversation, and it's not, hey, send me something, call you later, bye.
So do you try to draw stories out from them?
Exactly. That's sort of the secret sauce. The real goal is not necessarily to tell your own story. I mean, at some level, of course, an important conversation, you need to brand yourself as a job seeker. There's certain key points you want to get across. But really, for me, the biggest takeaway is it's about listening. It's about creating that learning opportunity where two people are talking, they're going back and forth. It's the same kind of way you'd have a conversation with your friends over coffee or an evening beer. And we all love to talk, and so getting other folks to talk to you is the best way to problem solve, to find out what's really going on, and then figure out how you can help them.
I'd hate to think what this program would be without stories.
Exactly.
Andrew, have you ever come up against someone who you don't feel like wants to hear your story, who just wants to hear the facts and figures, or And how would you deal with that? Or is everyone just want to hear a story?
I think that's a good question. You know, I think about 5 to 10% of the time, Sarah, there are people or situations in which you just got to say the facts real quick. But I think you can still do that in a way that allows for conversation. So maybe there's someone's short on time. Maybe there are some different learning styles. At the end of the day, I think we all need to speak not the way we want to speak, but the way that someone else wants to be spoken to. And to look at it from their perspective. I think there is a subset of people that do like that. But it's funny, everybody makes decisions emotionally. And so even with, nerds get excited about data. And so I think even understanding how people look at data, and I'll include myself there as someone who does that, but understanding how they look at data will help all of us, I think, to convey it in a better way.
Is it important when you're conversing with people about these stories to keep in mind who your audience is? Are you telling the same story to everybody the same way, or are you changing it based on who you're speaking to?
That's funny that you say that. With some of the larger organizations that I'm working with, we're developing organizational stories. So I think this can also apply to individuals that I might be coaching. And what we talk about is there may be a situation where you or someone on your team helped another business or project or something. But when we look at all the people that were involved in the project, we can use a different example. So you may have been a CFO, there may have been a CIO, and there may have been a CEO involved. So where I'm going with this is that if I'm going to tell you a story and you're the CEO, I may tell the same story to you, but I'll really highlight what the financial officer maybe was thinking about. And I'm going to be talking about in terms of cash flow, getting my receivables down, things that I did there. I may have also worked on this project may have interfaced with the technology team. So I might be talking with you about, hey, we had really great integration with the technology. It had great ease of use. Users were delighted. So I'm going to maybe use the same story, but even highlight different people. Stories are about people. We always want to think about who you helped. Who did you help? Who benefited from working with me? And what was their perspective? And to the degree that the person I'm talking with you mirrors in their interests and their background another person in my story, I might want to highlight that character in the story.
Well, we also want to thank you for sharing your story today with us. And in a future program, we'll get into how do you build these stories.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well,
Andrew, thanks for coming. You can hear more advice from Andrew and other experts from future and previous job chats by going to our website at www.newlandingsjobchat.org or just search for Job Chat on YouTube.
Andrew, if somebody wanted to reach you for further information, where could they contact you?
7storylearning.com, SEVEN, storylearning.com. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
And for all of you, until next time, may your days be full of health, happiness, and success.